All right, kiddos, we got um, one of the options this week for you to tackle the use of irony in this novel and how that use of irony by Lee gives us more and more layers to how the theme of fear and fear, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, how that particular theme is being developed and made, given layers by having irony being used to kind of give us these little moments of surprise so that we can kind of stop a little bit and think about what's happening in the story that has a relationship to how fear actually works in human nature, or how it works in a child's perspective, um, how it works in the realms of prejudice, racism, classism. There's all sorts of things that are being kind of surrounding this whole concept of fear. Um, but she one of her ideal tools that she uses in order to kind of drive home this idea of how the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, how it can operate from the perspective of a child or from perspective of their father. So lots of cool things happening at this stage in the story. It's starting to really take a turn for the serious as the children witness their father defending Tom Robinson in this case, where he's been accused of raping Mayella Ewell, who's a young woman from the other side of town. She and the Ewell clan literally live in a dump. They're not looked fondly upon throughout the community, and the case involves her accusing a black man of raping her, and it's Dad's responsibility to defend Tom Robinson against those accusations. This scene begins with a bit of irony from the standpoint of Jem and Scout, too, watching something unfold in front of their house that they misunderstand. And it involves a situation where Tom is being threatened by a lynch mob that's forming outside of town. And if Atticus doesn't uh, make a move to move Tom from the jail, he could wind up losing his life that night. So it's scary stuff. The kids don't quite understand all of it, right? But it's ironic in the sense that we know something that kids don't, right? So what I'd like for you to do in this chapter, if you happen to choose this chapter, again, I'm giving you several options this week on which chapters you can do. But you're looking at both how dramatic and situational irony are at work, not only when they happen, but how the author is getting us to really think about how prejudice works, how what are the implications of prejudice as it works in the town, right? What is Atticus being called to do, right? And how does that impact his family? There's all sorts of interesting things that are developing at this point in the novel, and she's using irony to kind of allow us to see into that. So we have dramatic irony, we have situational irony. Dramatic irony occurs when we see things in the events that a character fails to see. Jem misunderstands what he sees at the beginning of this chapter. Situational irony occurs when the stuff that happens isn't what we expect. Okay, so there's lots of surprises at the end of this chapter. And it's one of the most intense moments of the story, both in the novel as well as in the film adaptation of the novel. One of the things I was trying to drive home in a previous assignment is that a perspective of characters is really shaped by their setting. If it's dark outside, they can easily misunderstand things that they can only partially see. It's very metaphorical, right? If you think about what I just said there, right? If they can only partially see things in the evening, they may not be able to see it for what it is, right? That concept has been played with many times over in this novel. It's been, especially in the case of Boo Radley, right? They can only see him through stories that were created about him, right? They probably only partially see him for what he is, right? That's kind of how sometimes the concept of prejudice works, right? It's a huge metaphor, right? So they interpret the meaning of what's around them by what they see and hear, which is part of setting, right? Another part of setting is the situation of the story. In this scene, we experience dramatic irony with Jem as he misreads what he sees and hears through what he knows about his father's duty to defend Tom Robinson. Okay, that opens up a whole new conflict in the story about Jem trying to basically prove to his dad that he is more than just a boy. Okay, so there's this element really starts to work in the story right about now in the novel. Okay, and you'll see how irony leads to Jem trying to grow up in this chapter. Okay, so your objective is to do two things with this chapter. One is identify irony when it happens, and then secondly, ask yourself how that sense of irony is allowing us to see another angle in the theme. Okay, so at the start on this, I went through and I went to the PDF file of the story, and in chapter 15, I copied and pasted it in these columns here so that you can kind of see these details and spot the irony, um, and then identify it, and then basically describe it in the right side. Okay, on the right side. So what I want you to do is actually make a copy of this document and then type in your responses on the right there and then submit that into Google Classroom. So the first half of this is about the beginning of the chapter where Jem misunderstands what's happening in front of his house regarding a group of men. He sees them as a group of men who are basically telling Atticus that he's got to go and get his client out of jail, otherwise he's going to wind up dying that night. And then the last part of it is what actually happens that night when Atticus does go down to the jail. Okay, and then there is a lynch mob involved, and the kids are seeing it, right? And they see everything from a child's perspective, and they can only partially hear things, and they can only partially see things. So your objective is to answer these questions, all relating to irony, right? You're not only just identifying the use of irony, but you're trying to think about how it lends itself to the theme, and then submit that to into Google Classroom this week. Everything now has points for fourth quarter. Um, as long as you do the objectives or you do the assignments, it can only improve your grade. So if it's done in a way that isn't quite complete, I'll give it back to you, and then you can complete it at a later time. And then this is all leading up to like a final assignment that I'm going to give you when we finish the book, where I'm going to have you do a summative piece on how the theme of the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, how that operates in many parts of the story.